Good morning, Revolution, everybody, and welcome to our stream. Welcome, Hannah and Luke and Scott. And let me first offer a big, hearty, revolutionary congratulations to Hannah and to Luke on your election victories. It's a really, really big thing. And thank you very much for having the courage and strength and back home we call it bodaciousness that led to run for office. I want to start off by marking that today, November 7th, is the anniversary of the October Revolution. It was a history making event. It was the first time that a working class state was established that lasted up until the early 1990s. It changed history. And while there were setbacks, there were huge advances, and our movement and working class movements around the country are still drawing the lessons of that revolution. And so, happy birthday, October, and congratulations to everybody who is continuing to struggle for socialism. Um, and that brings me to what we're talking about today. We're talking socialism wins. Tuesday was a huge day for the left, beginning with the Mamdani win here in New York City. It rocked the ruling class's world. There's no question about that. They threw everything that they have, including the kitchen sink at our brother. But you know what? They were fighting a mass movement. They were fighting a tidal wave of struggle. It was a force of nature, and a mass movement, and you can't really stop a force of nature. Um, and we today offer our congratulations. But there was another big thing on Tuesday, and that is that MAGA and Trump got a butt whooping all over the country. And the I'm talking about a butt whooping. And the Mamdani election was part of that. I think that's how we have to see it. Working class people from all walks of life, all over the country, said enough, and they're looking for a new kind of politics. They are rejecting the politics of old. Something bold, as I said a few moments ago, something bodacious. And the newest thing and the most bold and most bodacious thing on the block are the communist candidates that ran and won on Tuesday. And we're honored, as I said, to have Hannah and Luke this morning, both of whom ran outstanding campaigns for office. And we had several around the country. Not all of them won, but in our book, if you run, you're a winner. You win by running. You win by putting yourselves out there. You win by telling the truth. You win by building united fronts and fighting for the working class. And that's what our candidates did. So let's get started. Hannah, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? I know you're living in Ithaca now. How did you come to socialism? What radicalized you? And what prompted you to run?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep,
Okay,
loud and
great.
clear.
So I'm Hannah, and I moved to Ithaca around 2016 when I was 12, and I grew up here and I stayed here for university. And I got involved with CPUSA when I started college, largely because Ithaca, as a college town, it's home to Cornell University, is home to immense wealth inequality. So on the Hill, we have Cornell University, which doesn't pay its fair share to the town, and then the city is really struggling to fund essential services. The majority of our city are tenants. I think 70% of all people in Ithaca don't own their home, and rents increase every single year by exorbitant amounts. So that was really what motivated me to run, to address, above all, wealth inequality, rent stabilization, and a higher minimum wage for all people, and to address the fact that Cornell is such a large toll on the Ithaca community and that it continues to hoard more and more wealth and more property while Ithacans struggle. So, yeah, I was really excited to run because this is a mostly student district. It's split between mostly undergraduates who live here and also longtime residents. And the representative of this district is generally either a local or a student. So, as both a student and a local Ithacan, I wanted to bring together these two communities in a shared vision for affordability and justice for working people.
And that's an admirable goal. Um, and you were motivated because the rent was too damn high, and people were making not enough money to survive. Luke, what about you? Same question. You're in Massachusetts, and how did you come to socialist politics, and what prompted you to run?
Good set of questions. My name is Luke Rotello. I'm a 24-year-old co-chair of the Western Massachusetts Club of the CPUSA. I live in Northampton, and I ran for Ward 5 City Council in this year's municipal elections. I actually sort of had to work my way backward from the international down to the local. Before I was a communist, I was studying political geography and history in many different countries, and it took a whole lot of that and some key conversations to sort of bring me to the understanding that there is a logic and a science to how politics is conducted anywhere on Earth, from the grandest scale to the tiniest of local levels, and that logic is understood through Marxism. So that led me to looking very closely at conditions right around me. That was sort of my entry point to communist politics and to practicing communist politics at this level. Um, I you know, with along with our club, we were able to bring a um, a coalition built around opposition to austerity, particularly harmful to our public schools. We were able to bring this coalition into being and to imbue it with a class analysis and character that really had not been seen in our city before. And you know, we shook the doors. We were, we're banging on the doors. We have some feet in, and we are looking at elections to come. It was a mixed result on Tuesday. I myself won 592 votes, or 43%, and most of the candidates on our slate did not advance, but some did, including the highest overall vote total for the at-large city council, and also coming within 80 votes of defeating a mayor who is principally responsible for this austerity, and who was endorsed by our governor Maura Healey at the last second. So even just seeing the tremendous advances of working class politics and working class independence in our city, it is incredibly inspiring for the path forward.
So you were fighting austerity, and
Indeed.
you brought a class analysis and a class struggle approach to the campaign, what we call the Communist Plus. Again, congratulations on your win. Scott, good morning. When Bernie ran several years ago, you remember that, we said that the country was in the midst of a socialist moment, right? And we were arguing that something new was happening. Not that we had a majoritarian socialist movement. We weren't saying that, but that socialism was back on the agenda, you know. Several million people voted for Bernie, you know, in both elections. Um, but it ebbed a little bit, you know. Biden got elected, and now Trump. But what Frederick Engels called the mole of history continued to burrow, you know, continued tunneling. Class struggle didn't disappear. Would you say that with the Mamdani win in New York and other left election wins around the country, and there were several, including ours, in your opinion, is the socialist moment back?
Um, yeah, I think so. And in terms of that idea of socialism being on the agenda, I tend to think that especially for us, socialism is always on the agenda. May not always be the first point on the agenda, but um, we understand it in that scientific way that Luke mentioned, right? That there's an underlying logic, there are contradictions, and there are obstacles that have to be overcome for our society to develop. We're butting up against limits of capitalism as far as democracy is concerned. So we recognize that socialism is the framework in which those contradictions can be resolved, in which progress can happen. So it's always on the agenda, even if it's not receiving mass attention. But yes, I think especially now with the fascist onslaught, um, people see that. It's not just Trump, that it's billionaires standing with him, standing behind him. It's that ultra reactionary section of the ruling class, and they are. I think people were moved very widely in this election by the idea that they needed people who could be counted on to stand up to the Trump regime, and that means, as we've seen historically, who most resolutely stands up to fascists. It's socialists, communists, trade unionists. It's the forces of the left and the working class, and that's where people are headed.
That's an interesting point you made. The Trump's attacks and the attacks of the billionaires, you know, it seemed to boomerang. Hannah, I was listening to a comic the other day that made just that point. Um, let's play the clip and see if you encountered, Hannah, similar feelings amongst the students and working people of Ithaca. Could you run that clip, please, real quick? Take a listen. And I encourage everybody to listen to the whole thing. It's a really brilliant presentation that this young brother made. Um, while we're
to stop Mamdani have only helped him. Only helped him because billionaires have come out in force against every policy and against Zoran as a candidate. And that says a lot. They're like accidentally making him more popular. You know? President Trump even said that if Zoran wins, he may have to mobilize the National Guard, take over New York City, which would be not just like a spit in the face to an open, free, and fair election, but what messaging does that look like to you? That you might have to send the National Guard and take over a city if the dude who wants free pre-K wins? No? Like all their efforts, they've spent so much money. Zoran himself has said, y'all are spending way more money on ads trying to campaign against me than I was even gonna tax you.
kind of funny, Hannah. Did you experience that kind of sentiment while you were campaigning in Ithaca?
I
Were
did.
Go on, tell us
Yeah.
about it.
Even in our very small city of Ithaca, New York, There are very strong landlord interests, and they're very united against any candidate that proposes rent stabilization, higher code enforcement for safer homes, things like that. So the landlords were putting quite a bit of money into this race, considering what a small race it was. And in many instances, for example, I had tenants who were supporting me, and their landlords weren't allowing them to put up any sort of signs outside their home, but instead they were putting up signs, the landlords were, for my opponent. So they were very threatened about an idea of a working class agenda, and they fought very hard to keep it from happening. But in the end, there were more working class people and more tenants in the city than there are landlords and wealthy people.
More tenants, more landlords. And the landlords would be the first to talk about free speech, you know? And here they go cutting it. But Hannah, I also heard that y'all did a lot to mobilize the vote. You did voter registration, you did voter registration, you did a lot of door knocking, and you ran on a slate. Can you talk to us a little bit about the inner ingredients of the campaign and what you experienced when you were talking to people?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, as a student district, we have very, very low turnout in these elections. So what we were really focused on was turning out as many young people as possible to fight for things that matter to them. We did a massive voter registration drive, and we had the highest turnout in this election out of at least the last 2 decades of turnout in a similar election. Young people turned out, people who I had never even spoken to, who had heard about the race and wanted expanded public transportation and stabilization, and they came to vote. And for many of these people, it was their very first time voting. I had many freshmen in college say that they had just turned 18 and they were excited to finally vote for a candidate and a policy that spoke to them. So I worked really closely with a lot of Cornell groups, student groups, and also Ithaca local groups. And we worked together to unite a lot of local labor unions in the struggle, community organizations, tenant unions, and we ended up knocking, I think it was 2,000 doors. So we knocked every single door in the district at least 5 or 6 times. It was a massive project, especially for Ithaca, New York. It seems like in such a small town, races are much more relational, but it ended up being where we were really talking to people in the entire district. We were doing phone banks, calling people twice a week. And by the end of the election, people were telling me, I've already been called, I'll vote. I get it. But that to me it means that we were in a good race, that everyone had been reached so many times that they were saying, we get it, please stop calling.
That's what you call saturation. 2,000 doors you knocked on 5 or 6 times. Wow, that's huge. Luke, now you ran in Northampton and you also ran as part of a slate. Talk to us a little bit about how you mobilized the vote. Did you also do voter registration? Did you also knock on doors? And what was it like? How did people react to a communist running for office? I imagine it was the first time that they met a red blooded and red minded U.S. citizen.
For many cases, that is absolutely right. I actually want to start with an anecdote that sort of taps into what Hannah was saying, where in the last couple of weeks of the campaign, there were a number of major canvassing pushes, particularly on behalf of our coalition. And there was one group in particular that came out of our high school. There was a set of high school students who said, "We really want to canvass for Luke." They spoke to one of the teachers who they knew was also helping me with the campaign, and she said, "So why do you want to canvass for the communist?" They said, "Oh, we don't care that he's a communist. We care that he's the youngest person on the ballot." And it pointed to a certain sort of unity that we had managed to forge in struggling for of course, for the working class contribution to our politics and for working class governance, but also for the political space and representation of youth, of queer people, of tenants, of these large sections of society that have really found themselves on the outside looking in. And that really takes me to our method of campaigning, which ran up against a different set of parameters. It was actually less that we faced. We didn't in many cases face an open red baiting campaign. In fact, there's a particular radio show ideologue with significant sway in the local sphere, who was trying to provoke my opponent to red bait me. And she actually refused. And I don't think that she refused out of, any particular sympathy for the Communist Party, but rather because there was a certain political imperative for her not to. But our opponents undertook a campaign of red baiting in different ways, trying to sort of starve the ward of democratic oxygen, of forums for participation and engagement, trying to basically shut down a number of events and conversations. On one occasion, the city council president personally intervened on behalf of my opponent to try to shut down an event that I was having. This is because my events were public and my opponents were these private, invite-only sort of whisper network events. But we were able to counteract that very effectively by taking our politics exactly as Hannah did, again, to every door. We actually, our ward is a complex mix of homeowners, of tenants, of people living in public housing, of people living in subsidized housing. And we didn't just focus on the homeowners, certainly as my opponent did. We went to every single door. We went multiple times to the public housing units, to the to these major complexes. We were knocking on doors. We were talking to people about issues, and we were fighting for their representation in every sphere of government. And that left these sort of lasting impressions. People came away from this with, something more of a clear understanding that, communists aren't maybe what they were told in school. Communists maybe aren't what they heard about from Fox News or what have you, but actually working people fighting with a clear program, with a clear vision for the resolution and for fighting back against the problems that have been imposed on them at every level.
We're a movement of ordinary working class people, regular people, and I would say an extraordinary movement of ordinary working class people with a great program. Scott, did you go out to Ithaca and help with the campaign? Number one, huh?
I am ashamed to say that I did not.
Oh, okay.
I regret that I wasn't able to make it up. But it was a good campaign, and the Ithaca Club poured itself into that work. And again, as as Hannah alluded to, and you mentioned, Joe, this was not just a CPUSA victory. Hannah was part of an institution called the Solidarity Slate that's been built over a number of elections now by left forces in Ithaca, including DSA, Working Families, the Ithaca Tenants Union, and with a lot of labor backing, that also has, instead of rather than just electoral stuff, it's also campaigning around rent stabilization and around just cause employment protections. So this was very much a big coalition campaign where the party played an important role, and I hope will play an even bigger role in the future.
Follow-up question, Scott. 3 days now since the Mamdani win in New York. How are people, you live in a small town, upstate New York, how are people responding? I mean, what are the conversations like?
Most of the folks that I know in the sort of broad anti-MAGA movement are delighted by Mamdani's win. Even folks who are very strongly who identify, as Democrats, et cetera, and did not. I don't think I saw a single post from anyone in my um, sort of broad circle around here criticizing Mamdani or backing. I don't think people fell for it at all. So, I think we have to be careful. There's this idea that is in some part true, right? That establishment Democrats are trying to crowd out the working class and socialist um, movement, and on the national level, on the billionaire level, in terms of the ruling class leadership of the Democratic Party, that's absolutely accurate. But in terms of like the rank and file, the people who vote Democrat, the people who identify as Democrats, liberals, whatever, I didn't see any attempt to discredit or undermine Mamdani. And in fact, yeah, people seemed very excited about something new, something like you said, bold, a focus on affordability and issues that matter to ordinary people.
And that's the bottom line. Hannah, it's said that as difficult as it is, the easiest part of an election campaign is getting elected, and that the hardest part is what's coming, governing and working for the people. Now, I know you haven't taken office yet, but when will you? And has your coalition started talking about first steps yet? Having trouble hearing you.
Are you muted, Hannah?
Oh, yeah. Do you hear me?
Yep, now we can.
Um, yeah, I was muted, sorry. I will be taking office the first week of January, and we've already begun to think about the first steps that we want to take and the legislation we want to bring forward immediately. And it's really exciting. Like I said, this was a campaign that was won with many unions and political organizations and community organizations working together. So over the next few months, we're going to work together to figure out how to start on all our different priorities that we ran on, and also I've been talking to students and asking them what things they want to see me do, talking to young people and working people, and making sure that those priorities are up there, and I'm ready to start in January. But I think the first thing that we will be working on as soon as I get into office will be passing, opting into the REST Act, which allows Ithaca to implement rent stabilization. So that is our first step.
Stabilize the rent, you know. My Mondami is talking about, affordability, and I think you got to go further in New York City than to stabilize it, because it's $3,000 for a one-bedroom apartment, 2,500 for an efficiency. I mean, who the heck can afford that? It's so out of control. Luke, you're going to run again. I hear, and you're excited to do that, and your coalition partners have already approached you. Is that true?
That is absolutely true. And it actually, when we pulled papers and began this campaign back in April, there was a lot of skepticism from even some of the same people who have now seen the practice of a communist campaign and are, they themselves are not communists, but they are fully convinced of the necessity of our role in this coalition going forward.
I think that's absolutely right. Absolutely right. Scott, yours truly, moi, I'm running. Hannah and Luke inspired me to run for office. And I was telling the National Committee a few weeks ago, I've been approached before to run, but I told them, y'all, I ain't running for nothing but cover, you know. But to see our younger comrades stand up to witness their courage, to witness their tenacity, um, and now inspired by the winning, I got to throw down myself. Um, and you're part of the New York district leadership, where we've met a few times. what kind of campaign do you see me running in this time around? What is that campaign going to look like?
Well, I think we need to approach it in terms of what the broad goals are, right? So the object of, we talk about working class leadership in the struggle for democracy, right? And the goal of bringing forth working class leadership, of bringing forth trade union and socialist and communist uh, candidates and leaders, isn't just a kind of turf war, right? It's because we know that we need to equip the movement with the best tactics and the most resolute fighters for justice and democracy. So the campaign that we want is one that will build on the massive energy in New York and around the country for democracy, against Trump, against this threat to the city. There's a hands-off New York City coalition that's forming that the party is part of. The party is very involved in housing, public housing work, and we certainly want to, build our presence there and make the strongest contribution we can, and build a kind of a coalition campaign that is, I would say, communist forward, right? That doesn't hide from the party's name, the party's history, the party's label, because another part of this is we're fighting for our party's right to be a legitimate part of the political life of this country. And we're fighting for the right of the working class to have a party that represents its interests and the interests of oppressed people and not the interests of the ruling class. So that was very vague, but that's the kind of approach that we are beginning to think through.
We need to fill in some details on that program, and then to follow Hannah and Luke's example, we need to start knocking on some doors, you know. And I don't know what district we're going to run in yet in New York, but we're going to have to multiply the 2,000 doors that y'all knocked on by, I don't know, a factor of 10 or 20. So we're going to need some campaign workers, and maybe y'all can send some help down from Ithaca to help us out during the petition gathering process. And Luke, if y'all want to send some folks down from Northampton, you know, you're welcome to come too. We'll find a place to house and feed you. I want to ask you guys, Trump and MAGA, they have spent a lot of time red baiting, called, even though Mamdani is a democratic socialist, and we don't have no qualms with that, called him a communist and tried to dissuade the working class voting public from voting for him, tried to shun him. And Cuomo did the same thing, you know. It's falling on deaf ears. Hannah, why do you think young people and middle-aged people, some old people, aren't buying the red baiting anymore? What's your opinion?
So, what I experienced running in Ithaca is that the reason why red baiting didn't work, because they definitely tried. There were several emails sent out to the whole district from sitting council members saying she's a communist, she's a member of the CPUSA and the DSA, and we can't let this happen. And it didn't work. People still turned out, including, like what Scott was saying, Democrats and people who have voted their entire lives for Democrats and do not consider themselves to be communists. And I think the reason why this red baiting didn't work is because in Ithaca, our Ithaca CPUSA club, our Ithaca DSA club, and all these other political organizations are so in, the community doing everyday work with everyone. So it's no longer possible to scare people with, these scary communists, because everybody knows Ithaca CPUSA members as people who show up to picket lines and people who come to mutual aid events and people who, contribute and give back. So I think when you really know, local commie members, it makes it harder to red bait like that. And that's why I think it didn't work, because I knocked these people's doors and they knew me, and I wasn't some sort of, you know, imaginary communist. I was just a person who grew up in Ithaca, who was a communist, but was running to make everyone's lives more affordable and easier.
Making everyone's lives more affordable. No bomb throwing Bolshevik, but a regular young woman from Ithaca fighting for the people. Luke, why didn't the red baiting work? What's your opinion?
So I think it's kind of a two-part question. First, earlier this year, our party was very astute in analyzing this as one of MAGA's overreaches. MAGA would overreach in certain ways, and I think in the ideological sphere, one of their overreaches has been to call every seat of opposition communist, because it's one thing when that is a targeted term, when that is coming after us, but when the underlying logic where red baiting is actually targeting working people, it is actually targeting progressive forces as a whole. When that becomes apparent, because they are targeting like everyone who sits in opposition to MAGA is described as a communist. It really loses its teeth, and actually, it's not only us who are standing up and saying, "So what?" And I think, really, by the same token, we've been able to certainly, one of our contributions, one of our many contributions to the coalition that now exists in Northampton, was framing the local struggle as a function of how we were going to stand up against Trump. We have a very powerful, very entrenched, democratic sort of like bourgeois political machine, like Democratic Party's bourgeois political machine. It's a very powerful force in our city, and the Republican Party is currently marginal. They fielded only one candidate who lost in a landslide this time. But we have been able to very effectively contest the terms of, who is going to stand up. It actually gets back to Scott's point, who is actually going to be the consistent fighter against fascism? Is it going to be, this vacillating set of forces that we currently have in leadership where, for instance, just as a high profile example, when the order came down from the top to put the flags at half staff, our mayor just went right along with that on behalf of Charlie Kirk, um, you know, when Trump said you have to put the flags at half staff in honor of Charlie Kirk, our mayor did so for the full 3 days everywhere that we had flags flying. It was just one example of many where we could sort of point to that and say, is this who you want to be standing up against Trump? Is this the set of forces that will get the job done? We were able to very effectively, and we will continue to very effectively say, no, it needs to be working people in the lead.
So you can't bow down to Trump and lead working people in the fight for justice. Scott, Luke says it was overreach, labeling everybody a red. They called Obama communist, Biden communist, socialist, Nancy Pelosi, on and on and on. Was that the issue, in your opinion? Certainly part of it.
Yeah, definitely. You know, they wore it out, especially since the portion of the electorate that actually experienced the Cold War is getting smaller and smaller, right? We now have whole generations of people that were not alive during that era when of the constant fear mongering about the Soviet threat and this and that. It just doesn't work the same way, and that's why they have to keep upping the volume on it. And yeah, so that was part of it. Another part of it, Hannah had a really good point about when you talk to people, when you know people, red baiting doesn't. When you know communists, red baiting doesn't work. And I think another part of it is that working class people are not dumb, contrary to what the ruling class thinks. Like they can't be led around by the nose. They actually look at the world and they think about the world and they have ideas and they have questions. And when you get out there and talk to people and engage with their ideas, both at the on stuff at the very local level, but also very big picture stuff about what a just society looks like and how we get there. Like that, yeah, that when they like your answers, when they think you bring something to the table, that changes how the receptiveness to red baiting.
And the important thing is that we have to bring a vision to the table of what a just and democratic and equitable USA will look like. And that's what we're fighting for. And when we talk about Bill of Rights socialism, that's what we're talking about. And that's what our party stands for. We have a mailbag a question. Let's pull it up and take a quick shot at it, and then we'll let Hannah go back to school and classes, and maybe back to work, and Luke as well, and we'll finish up. The discussion question this week is: there's a roll of the drum. The drum is rolling. The drum is continuing to roll. I can hear the drum even if you can't hear it. Well, let us, if we don't have the discussion question ready, I want to talk a little bit about a comrade of ours that recently passed away. Can we bring his image up? Is that possible? He's was an old comrade, brother of mine. He's from New York City. There he is with the hat and the black jacket on. Grew up in East Harlem. His name, Jaime Cruz. He joined the communist youth movement in the struggle for Puerto Rican rights as a young worker. I met Jaime in DC. He had overcome a lot of issues. He had overcome drug addiction and joined the revolutionary movement. And we worked together on a whole number of issues, around student rights, around the struggle for jobs for young people during the recession of 1981 through 83. We organized youth festivals. We fought for the end of apartheid in South Africa. We fought for independence for Puerto Rico. We fought for abortion rights. We fought for LGBTQ rights. You name it, Jaime was in the struggle. He moved back to Puerto Rico for several years. We got reacquainted afterwards. Jaime was a founding member of the Claudia Jones School in Washington, D.C., which is a public Marxist school, over the last 4 or 5 years. And I tell you, he was the third working class intellectual that I had the pleasure of meeting. The first being my mom, the second being who was a school librarian, the second being my dad, who was a steel worker. The third was Jaime. And he introduced me to other working class intellectuals that I had never heard of, like Schomburg, who the museum in Harlem is named a Black Puerto Rican, like Pedro Albizu Campos, and so on and so forth. Jaime died 2 weeks ago after a long battle with cancer. Rest in peace, rest in power, comrade Jaime. Guys, sister Thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Congratulations on your election. We will be following your campaigns and your work closely. Let us know what we can do to help. Until next week, as we always say at the end of our program, stay strong, stay safe, stay in the fight. Take care, everybody, and happy November 7th. Take care. Bye bye.